This evening we are beginning a study, a 6-week study, if you would, from Max Lucado. And this study is You Are Never Alone. You Are Never Alone. And throughout these next few weeks, we're going to be studying from the Gospel of John. And we're going to take a look at the miracles, all right, and how that these miracles show God at work in our lives. There's a quote from Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa said that the most terrible poverty is loneliness and the feeling of being unloved. This is a person who has convinced themselves that no one cares, that no one can help you, that no one hears you, and no one will answer your call for help. In other words, you feel on the inside, you feel as if you are alone. So when we look at the disciple John, and he's writing this Gospel of John, that we know he is older, and that he is probably feeling this way. He's feeling like that he is the last of the disciples. He is the last one to tell the stories, to recount the stories. Perhaps he feels that way. The purpose, I believe, that as we'll view the video, we'll see that there's a twofold purpose for the miracles. And he mentions both of those. John himself said in John 20:31, he said, "We see the miracles that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in His name." That's one of the purposes of the miracles. A second purpose of the miracles is mentioned in the video, and it says that the disciples, as they viewed the miracles, as they saw these miracles performed, then they themselves believed that He truly was the Messiah. In our own study from the Gospel of John and from others, our last study being in Mark, we learned that that was truly the purpose of the miracles. There's proof that He truly was the Messiah, and that those who saw would believe. As we look at this teaching, John starts out recounting the very first miracle, and then he proceeds through the other miracles, but he starts out with the miracle at Canaan. And there at Canaan, it was at the wedding festival. And I'll just read from John chapter 2, just the first 2 verses, and you can read the rest of the story, and much of it is recounted in the video. But it says, "On the third day there was a wedding in Canaan of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, 'They have no wine.' Jesus said to her, 'Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come.' His mother said to the servants, 'Whatever he says to you, do it.' Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, 'Fill the water pots with water,' and they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, 'Draw some out now, and take it to the master of the feast.' And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it come from, but the servants who had drawn the water, the master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, 'Every man at the beginning set out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior, you have kept the good wine until now.'" We see that in this very first miracle. We might ask ourselves, what was the very purpose of even recording this miracle? It seems such a minor miracle, such a minor request from this woman. Well, let me ask you tonight, when was the last time, or really, what was the last request that you made of God? In other words, what was your last prayer request? I want you to think about that right now. Was that prayer request for some majestic thing? Was it something great that God needed to do? Or was it just for some small miracle in your life? Some small miracle. What would be that small miracle? Have you ever caught yourself apologizing to God for asking for such small request? Such a small thing. Lord, if I could just do this. Lord, if you could just help me to do this. Those small requests. We might think about ourselves that saying, apologizing to God and saying to ourselves, perhaps if you could just take time out of your life, Lord, and your busy schedule and answer this small request. I know, God, it's just a small thing. But as we look at this miracle here today, that we find out that God, there's nothing ordinary and there is nothing too small for him to consider. Such a small request, but yet one that he answered. And in this teaching we can learn so much more about obedience. And we can learn so much more about how extraordinary God is in such a small miracle. We can see that this man, this Jesus, this one who was just, as many people viewed him, just an ordinary man who came to this place, made an extraordinary appearance. And from this miracle we know that the lives of many were changed there that day. As it is always, every time that we meet with the Lord and we have fellowship with him and we have a relationship with him, we're never the same again. So when you think about trying to bring this teaching to a close tonight, if you would, about these miracles. So I ask you that the miracle at the wedding in Canaan was not a healing. It was not a deliverance. It wasn't a resurrection. Jesus just simply turned water into wine. It was an incredible feat when you think about it, though. No one else could do that. No one else in Scripture has ever been able to do that. Not wine to water. Not wine to water. But he simply just turned water to wine. But was that the point? Was that the whole point of just showing what he could do? When we think about this miracle and we compare it to the other miracles, when we think about Lazarus, or we think about the blind man on the road to Jerusalem, when we think about that, we can say that this was quite ordinary. But I believe that when we look at it from a different perspective, that we see a God who is working in the ordinary. And when I think about that, isn't that what we're living today? Don't we just wake up every day and live this life and go through our day and go through this life? But we see a mighty God working miracles in our lives every day. We pause in this teaching tonight to look at a very simple miracle in such an ordinary place and an ordinary time. But yet, here we sit tonight and are reminded how awesome God was at that time, in that very time, and He's just that way today. I think it's time that when we just pause and we think about our lives, and we think about the small and great miracles of our life, and we begin to reflect on that, and we begin to reflect on how that God is there with us. He's there with us in our ordinary and everyday life. That is enough for us to believe. When we recount the things that God has done for us, that builds our faith. That builds our belief. It gives us hope. It gives us joy. It gives us peace in times of this life. I might ask you, we've been talking about the ordinary tonight, but let me ask you this question. How many of you could give testimony tonight about how God has answered a big request in your life. And then on the other hand, has He ever answered a small request? We can recount those big times. We can recount the time that we had something extraordinary happen in our lives. But what about that other small request? Father God, I just pray tonight to be able to sleep peacefully and rest tonight. Get rest. Did you thank Him the next morning for that? Lord, if I could just do this, or Lord, if I could, did you thank Him for those small requests? We want to jump up with hands and give praise and glory when God heals, when He answers a request, when all else fails. But what about those small things? This is what this really teaching is all about. Is how that He is there with you in the great and in the small, in the ordinary and in the extraordinary. But what does He deserve through it all? Our praise and our glory to Him, to His name. That's what He deserves. John writes in the 1st John, and he writes, "This is the confidence that we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to His will, He will hear us. And if we know that He hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have what we asked of Him." This is the promise and the hope that we have. In all things, if we ask according to His will, He will hear us and He will answer us. Throughout this study, there is a place here that asks that you recount or recall throughout the week the small things that God does in your life each day. Really, that's at the end of it, right there. At the end of the day, can you look back over the day and be reminded of the small things that He has done for you? In the midst of all the great and awesome things that He's done. That's what it's referring to. God is alone with, He is right there with you. He will never forsake you. He'll never leave you. He is right there. Absolutely, when things are this is how we started out. When we feel alone, when we feel no one hears us, when we feel that there is no hope, He is still there. When we feel like this day is not going well, when we feel like we just don't want to get up, when we feel that we just don't want to go there or do that, He's also there with us in those times too. Reminding us to be faithful to Him. Reminding us that He is faithful. He is faithful in everything. God desires to be involved in your everyday life. He wants to hear from you. He wants to have fellowship with you every single day. Every single day. So in this next week, I want you to be thinking about that. Thinking about how that God works in your life. And be thankful for that and give Him the praise and all that He deserves for the small things that He does for you every single day in your life. Well, that's the end of our session this week. Next week, our session will be from John. It will be from the 5th chapter of John. And the title of that teaching will be, God is with you when you're stuck. When you're stuck.